This is the Chab Dog Sports Talk Show. We're ADHD hosts that are OCD about our sports. Host Brandon Chabner brings you Eric the Well-Read, Frank the Tank, and Boston Mark for sports talk that's breaking news everywhere else. Now here's your host, Brandon Chabner.
All right, hello everybody, and welcome to a special edition of Chab Dog Sports Talk. We're typically on Sundays from 9 to 11. This is a special edition show. We're going to be talking with Seth Davis, who's a well-known commentator for college basketball on CBS, and also a very, I'd say, prolific writer in terms of various sports subjects, mostly dealing with college basketball. And we will be talking to him today about his book that he wrote on John Wooden, which I definitely encourage people to check out if you want to understand what goes into the mind of maybe the most successful college basketball, I think the most successful college basketball coach of all time, and just a model for what a coach should be. And I'm here with Eric Sauve, my co-host. How you doing, Eric?
Hey, Chab Dog. Fantastic. Thank you. What a great show.
Yeah, I'm excited about this. It's a crazy day of college football, but we're going to be focusing on college basketball more today. This is brought to you by Chabner Law, serving Southern California's transactional legal needs, and by Chab Dog Sports Blog for your sports headlines. And then I'd like to welcome Seth Davis to the show. How are you doing, Seth?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
Well, I'm glad we got this in, and looking forward to after the show, listening to it, and also watching some college football. But great to have you on. I was reading through your bio. It is kind of eerie that we've been in some of the same places. We grew up in Maryland, in Potomac, Maryland, both of us apparently. So you went to Bullis, right?
I did. Yeah, it's a good place to be from, good place to live, good place to visit.
Yeah,
and nice part of the world.
I was about 5 years behind you. I went to Churchill High School, played tennis there, but definitely knew a lot of people from Bullis. And then you were in New Haven for a while at the New Haven Register, right into the New Haven Register, correct?
Yeah, that's right. That was I got my start in journalism 2.5 years covering high school sports. Were you in New Haven as well, Brandon? Yeah,
I went to Yale College. So I was there 83 to 87, and I guess you were there a little later, right? You were there.
So you were in college 83 to 87. Okay, so you're older than me, which is good. Good. Yeah. No, and I like you more now. Most people. I'm talking to more and more people who are younger than I am, so I enjoy talking to people who are older. I look forward to basking in your wisdom.
Yeah, I've had more years on this planet to get things wrong in terms of my predictions, but New Haven. If you follow college football at all, I don't know if you heard about the Yale-Harvard game today. It was quite incredible. Yale was.
I did. I did. Actually, has it ended? I heard about the protest, and then I heard they were in overtime. Kind of following a little bit on Twitter. What was? Has it gone to a final yet?
Yeah, it was apparently 50 to 43. Yale came back in the last 2 minutes. They scored 2 touchdowns. They recovered an onside kick. I don't know if that was what the protest was about. But they pulled
deeper things to protest than that. That's crazy.
Pulling a rabbit out of the hat and beating their arch rival. I always root for Yale, even though I did go to Harvard Business School, but my allegiance is strictly with my college. I know you have a big you're a big Duke supporter, right?
Well, I'm a Duke graduate, certainly, so I guess that makes me a Duke supporter. I don't know. Depends on how you define support. If you define support as giving them a lot of money, then I haven't given them a lot of support.
But yeah, you're on TV and you're supposed to be objective, so I guess you can't be you don't want to come off as impartial or anything. But I would expect you to have a soft spot in your heart for Coach K and the Duke Blue Devils, who are always dominant, and this year they're number one, right? So
they're number one as of now, and they'll be number one until they lose. They'll lose at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they're number one right now. Pretty familiar. I think Krzyzewski actually, they beat. I guess we're recording this on a Saturday. They beat Georgetown last night, and I think he surpassed John Wooden for the most number of games won as a number one ranked team. So that's one more milestone for Coach K to topple there with that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, who knows when that's going to end? He seems like he's pretty vigorous, despite some. I know he had some back problems, I think, but who knows? He could be around for another 15, 20 years, right?
I don't know about 15 or 20. I mean, he's going to be 70. Yeah. I think it's going to be 73 in February. But so I don't think he's going to make 15 or 20. But he definitely has more time in him. I was down there a few weeks ago, and there's certainly no sign that he's ready to hang it up.
Maybe 10 years. Yeah, that would coaching into your 90s. That's kind of incredible.
Well, speaking of John Wooden, how old was John Wooden when he hung it up?
You know what? John Wooden was, I want to say he was 64.
Really?
It was a little bit controversial. And of course, he literally retired at the peak of his abilities because the last game they won for the championship in 75. And there was a mandatory retirement age in the UC system at the time.
Okay.
And I don't know if he was necessarily forced out per se. I think he was definitely ready to retire when he did. So it was a combination of, maybe saying, "Hey, I'm leaving because I have to, but also I want to." I think if he really, really wanted to coach for longer, I'm sure they would have found a way to make it work.
Yes, but I do remember that they were mandatory. There were such things as mandatory retirement ages that were respected and followed back then. And it's funny, John Wooden just always, growing up with John Wooden, he was always just seemed old to me. So but timeless in a way too. Never really did figure out how old he was. He looked older than 65, but then people did back then. Well, what I wanted to ask you about your book, Seth, is that the bookshelf was already pretty full at that point in 2014 when your book came out about Wooden. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I'm going to now, and I suggest everyone, all of our listeners, do pick it up, because what is it you bring different to the rest of the genre of John Wooden books out there?
Well, I'd like to think that I brought a fuller picture. It wasn't a sense of, hey, I want to tear this guy down and really, quote unquote, the dark side, but just, really write about who he really was and what his life was like. He had been presented for so long as this two-dimensional character, never had a bad day, never made a mistake, never was criticized. And of course, that's not real life. He had plenty of criticism. It took him 14 years at UCLA before they even won a game in the NCAA tournament. And of course, there were fewer teams in the tournament back then. You had to win your conference to even get in, but it took him 16 years before he won his first title. And so it took him a while to kind of get it rolling. And then when he really got it rolling, he was criticized for not winning enough. That he was winning by too much, that he was kind of ruining basketball. We've heard that. Directed it more recently at Gino Auriemma. So, he had a lot of things going on. He was an interesting guy. He was super competitive, like a lot of very high achievers. He was motivated by insecurity. He could be very petty about things. And then there was also the specter of a man named Sam Gilbert, who was a rogue booster at UCLA, who was there for many years and gave Wooden's players benefits that were very much in violation of NCAA rules, and actually went on to represent a lot of them as agents in the NBA, so it was all kind of in plain sight. And it wasn't really until towards the end of Wooden's career and then after he retired that people in general really began to appreciate the dimensions of all that went on. So it was a much more complicated story than I think it had been written in a lot of places, and frankly that had been presented by Wooden himself and by UCLA folks, and I just kind of wanted to get at those nuances.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, Seth, because back in the day, this wasn't out there, and it wasn't told. I'm not even sure if these violated the NCAA regulations at that time, maybe they did. I think the regulations themselves were evolving to capture this kind of behavior. But when did we first In your recollection, when did it first come to light that there was any kind of irregularities as it pertains to recruiting or compensation of players in the UCLA program and John Wooden?
Well, Sam Gilbert was, he sat at the front row at games and wore a fedora, and he was mobbed up. I mean, he was a mafia guy, and
well, we know that now.
Many years,
but
many years later,
was
indicted on money laundering and died 4 days before he was presented with that indictment. So that's a good goal for anyone to have, is to die right before you get indicted. And so it was kind of an open secret. Now, again, back then you didn't have the coverage and the news fascination and obviously social media where things could really spread. And so the NCAA did know about this and dig into this, but I think they got to a point, where they didn't want to dig any further, and Wooden didn't want to dig any further into it. It was kind of, the golden goose, and UCLA, that the popularity and the profitability of college basketball today very much ties itself to John Wooden. They had the famous game in the Houston Astrodome in 1968. It was a regular season game between UCLA and Houston, really put college basketball on the map. So the idea that the NCAA was going to go into all of that and just blow it up that was not going to happen. Which is on a certain level maybe understandable. And from John Wooden's perspective, it was not something that he ever tried to engineer. It wasn't something that he approved of or wanted to have happen. But by the same token, he lived almost 40 more years. He lived 35 years after he retired, and spent a lot of time talking about ethics and honesty. And whenever he was asked about this, he would say, "Oh, the NCAA came in and looked into all of this, and they found that nothing was wrong," and that just wasn't true. So, like I say, he found himself in a very complicated situation, not of his own making, and I think it's easy to sit back and judge him for that, for what he did or didn't do in that situation. I don't know that there are a lot of people in that situation who would have done things a whole lot differently. But Wooden, even when he was coaching, had kind of a holier than thou. He didn't drink, he didn't smoke, he didn't chase women, which set him apart from a lot of his fellow coaches. And I think he was not super popular with his fellow coaches, both while he was coaching and afterwards. A little bit of a holier than thou attitude that rubbed some people the wrong way.
Really? Wow. I never thought he let his ego get ahead of him that way. I guess for some people.
Well, great achievers have great egos, and he was not. It was not an exception. But he also was a very humble man and a very generous man, and he was humble of spirit, and he was confident in his abilities, but he was also insecure and thin-skinned to criticism. And I think he really preached the gospel of being a open-minded and a lifelong learner. He had a sign in his office that said, "It's what you learn after you know it all that counts." And I think that as he lived, all of his life, and in particular the 30-plus years after he was through coaching, he was able to reconnect with a lot of his former players who weren't that crazy about him from a personal standpoint when they were playing for him. But as often happens with the older we get, the smoother they got. And, he continued to grow and not think that he had all the answers to everything. And, I had the honor of being around him several times during the last 10, 15 years of his life. He was very accessible. He had a listed phone number. He had breakfast at the same place every day. You could sit in his den for 2 hours and he would recite poetry off the top of his head at the age of 90 plus. He was really an extraordinary man.
Huh.
Yeah, so he wasn't would you call him a player's coach?
I would not call him a player's coach. He came out of, again, a lot of this we have to appreciate the context. He was born in 1910 in central rural Indiana at a time when the Ku Klux Klan had elected the governor of the state of Indiana. He grew up on a farm without electricity or running water. He had 3 older brothers and a father who he thought walked on water. It was a very male-dominated culture. He served in World War II stateside, but he was in the Navy, and so it wasn't a touchy-feely time. It wasn't a time when men talked about their feelings. And, you fast forward, and now he finds himself in his late 50s, mid to late 50s, and he's coaching basketball in Los Angeles, California, in the shadows of Hollywood, in the late 60s with Vietnam and the racial progress and strife happening, and the political and racial awareness of people like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar at the time, Lou Alcindor. Bill Walton was an avid protester against the Vietnam War. There was a lot going on for this reserved Midwestern Christian, and so he could not relate to his players, really had no interest in relating to his players as to what they were going through as people, what it was like to be an 18-year-old, 19-year-old black man athlete at UCLA with everything going on. And that was where Sam Gilbert was able to step into that void. He was a mentor. He was an older, heavyset, mobbed up Jewish guy who had a way of relating to younger inner city black athletes, and they loved him, and they stayed at his house and hung out with his family. And so it was a complicated time. I would think, all things considered, John Wooden held up pretty well, but it was a complicated time.
That is very complicated, much more complicated, because it doesn't sound like Gilbert was such a bad guy after all. He was also looking after these, children from the inner city who obviously didn't come from a privileged background, and maybe would like some hot water for a change. What's your take on this whole tension between the NCAA, there we go, and recruiting violations, or alleged recruiting violations, or is it a violation to be able to to give a benefit to a young man's family so they can have their power turned back on?
Are we talking about John Wood in particular, or just general the issue of recruiting and violations and all that?
Let's go more general.
Okay, yeah. Well, listen, it's there's a natural tension built into the system. There's a natural corruption built into the system. Anytime you have this level of dollars flowing around, exchanging hands, and rules governing where that money should go and which hands it should be passed, you can apply that to any field in humanity, and there's going to be rule breaking, there's going to be corruption, there's going to be all kinds of shenanigans. In the case of college sports, it goes back to, the original Yale-Harvard rowing contest in the 1800s. And, I often direct, when we talk about this, I direct people to a book that a friend of mine, Dave Rebson, wrote. He worked for Big Ten Network, and he wrote about the earliest days of college football called the opening kickoff. It takes place in the late 1800s, early 1900s, of all kinds of these shenanigans going on with student athletes who weren't really students, and recruits who were getting paid. So it's as old as time. But there is a method to the madness. There is a purpose behind it, and that is that these universities, and I think rightly so, believe that athletics is a very important component of education. That there are things that you learn playing sports that are very valuable and very determinative of whether or not you're a success in life, that you don't get in a math class or a science class or an English class. So that's why you have so many athletes on campus playing for so many teams that don't make, not only do they not make a dime for the university, but they cost the university a lot of money. The only sports that make money for schools are football and men's basketball. You have a couple of women's basketball teams that might be in the black, but for the most part, it's only those two sports. Yet there's way more than only those two teams on campus. And a lot of the money that those two teams generate goes to paying for scholarships and salaries and facilities and everything else throughout the campus. So, why does University of Maryland have a soccer team? Why does University of Oregon have a volleyball team? They believe it's part of campus life, and they want those students on their campus. So they don't want to be in the business of pro sports. They don't want to be paying athletes to play. They want them going to class. They want them maintaining a certain GPA. They want them abiding by university rules, and they want them being real students. And I don't think anything's wrong with that. I think that's a good thing. I think there's hundreds of thousands of young men and women who are getting scholarship funds to get an education in this country, and we all know how expensive college is, and a lot of them are leaving school without debt. That's no small thing.
That is not.
By the same token, you have this very large, very bureaucratic organization. It's the classic huge ocean liner that just doesn't turn directions very quickly. It's not a little speedboat that can stop and turn on a dime.
True.
And unfortunately, this organization just doesn't adapt nearly as fast as it needs to. The dollars have gotten to be so huge that they are just not making their way into the hands of some of these young athletes who are generating that.
Well,
so
Seth, you made a very persuasive case there.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you made a very persuasive case there, Seth. I don't want to interrupt you. I just want to ask you that about the benefit of having amateur athletes, and that all makes sense. The benefit they get through the education, but they're generating so much income. It just seems to me, just in the notion of fairness, and a lot of other fans, that they should be getting something more for the risk they're taking there, because most of these kids aren't going to be playing in the pros afterwards. And
right. Well, you said a great word there, and that word is more. And that's where I like to start the conversation. The reason why I need to preface it the way I do is because so many people, and now that we've had this conversation, you'll hear everybody talk about it saying, these guys don't get anything. They don't get anything. They have to work for free. They're unpaid labor. It is factually, demonstrably false to say they get nothing.
That's correct.
They get a lot more than nothing. Now, should they get more? I do think they should get more, although I would also submit to your point that most of them are not going to be pro athletes.
Mm-hmm.
And the ones that are capable of earning that money, they do have that option of turning pro. Now, right now, there's rules in the NBA and the NFL about how old you have to be before you can get drafted, but those rules are passed by those leagues, not by the NCAA.
Mm-hmm.
They don't. The riddle is this. I would love to, it's a question of, if a football player or any athlete can get a job or accept money or, sell their autograph or sell their jerseys or do commercials. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be opened up that can allow these folks to make more money. And especially for before they get on campus. A lot of this comes out of the sneaker, and on the basketball front comes out of the sneaker circuits, because you have all these, grassroots AAU programs. If Nike wants to pay a certain kid's family and that kid's 15 years old and they want to give him $20,000 or $50,000 to play for a Nike team as opposed to the local Under Armour team, I don't see why anybody should really care about that. So they need to explore that. But what they don't want to do, and I understand and support what they don't want to do, is when it gets into recruiting. Hey, if you come play football for Alabama, I got a guy who owns a car dealership who will give you a $50,000 commercial. Well, if you come play for Georgia, we have a banker who will pay you $75,000 to come and not really work, or come and so he's just a Georgia alum, and they don't want to get into that, and they're stuck. And all the critics have never really proposed a decent solution to this. How do you open it up where these kids can make more money, because there is a lot more money, without it crossing over into recruiting? It's a heck of a dilemma, and so far I know they're searching for the answer, and I'm glad they are, but so far I haven't heard anything close to an answer.
You're right. Brandon, do you have an answer?
I think I don't know. I think somebody's got to sit down and really weigh the pros and cons of opening it up to these allowing these economic incentives for kids to choose colleges. It really is difficult. It opens up a big Pandora's box and puts in there a lot of influences that could be really harmful to kids that are trying to make these decisions, and it could just become out of control. So
I think that explains reality. That describes what's happening right now. All this is being done in the dark, in the shadows.
We're going to see some of these things shake out in the next, I guess, year as things like the Kansas investigation moves forward, because I know there were some things that got Bill Self in trouble with that, and I saw Seth talking about the Arizona coach and what's going, the investigation into what he was doing.
Now.
So it's gonna shake out, and there are going to be consequences for coaches who were not being completely straight and honest about what was going on, regardless of what the rules end up being. So, what do you
No, there's no. I just think a lot of it, to be honest, is we're kind of in that model of prohibition, where if you want people to, the easiest way to get people to stop breaking these rules is to get rid of the rules. Because if someone, there's a lot of money at stake and there's jobs on the line. I mean, it's like you're a coach and you're trying to recruit someone, and you have to do. I mean, we were just talking about supposedly the greatest, most ethical coach of all time. Being put in a compromising situation, and we would all like to say, "Oh well, I would never." And well, look, I mean, you got a wife, you got a family, you got a career, and you're looking at getting fired, and you have a chance to recruit a kid who can come help you save your job, and that if you don't do business a certain way, you're not going to get that kid. Not only are you not going to get him, you're going to have to play against him.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to go to another coach in your league who's going to. So I just think a lot of these rules have just got to go. Like, look, if they're going to be on the books, they got to be enforced, and I think that generally they're enforced pretty fairly and transparently. But at a certain point, we know we're only catching a small percentage of the violators, and I think the public and the politicians right now have moved well past the NCAA on this stuff, and I think the NCAA is going to try and play some catch up with opening up name, image, and likeness, and just find a way to move the ball forward. I wish they didn't have to get sued and have all this pressure on them for them to act. That's why I'm pro pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a commission, and they put out an announcement that says they're gonna do it. We're committed to doing it, but we're going to do it, but do it in a way that preserves the collegiate model. And I say the devil's in the details, and no one has really, as far as I can tell, been able to put meat on that bone in a way that makes sense to me.
Well, like you say, it takes a long time to turn the ship around, and there's a lot of details there, as we've just covered. A lot of detail there. This isn't going to be cleaned up anytime quick. You're right. Now,
yeah.
Seth, very interesting. You followed up your John Wooden book in 2014 with a book called "How Great Coaches Make Great Teams" in 2018. Was it that you, in working on the John Wooden book, you saw a lot of similarities in other great coaches? How'd that come about?
Well, it actually grew out of I hosted a digital interview show for a network called Campus Insiders, which is now part of Stadium. And I was interviewing a lot of people and just felt like I had a lot of great material that I wanted to develop that I thought maybe, could be a compendium in a book, and was able to get a publisher interested, and they thought it would work best as a coaching book and a leadership book. Mm-hmm. But it really is more than anything a collection of profiles. The idea is not to, extol these coaches as perfect men and, the culture of the coach and all that stuff. But they are fascinating characters. As a writer, coaches make for very, very fascinating characters. They are driven, tortured souls. And, they're highly successful, highly ambitious, highly complicated. And so to go into their lives and their families and their teams and their personas, beginning where it begins for every male, which is how, your relationship with your father, which there might be no relationship there. It may be, a very close relationship, and where you're, always motivated by trying to please him. Who knows? Mm-hmm. But breaking things down that way, and then how they went about, finding their way and making mistakes, and bouncing back from adversity and all that. So, and then taking those life experiences and then applying them to their teams, and doing it in a way that, communicates to their players their vision and gets their players to buy into their vision, and is able to do it in a way that is both edifying and motivating. So it's a very complicated job. It's a hard job. Any coach will tell you they feel the pain of losses much more than they experience the elation of wins.
It's George Allen.
So yeah, exactly. And it's like the more success they have, oftentimes the more miserable they are, because the more expectations and pressure, and you're trying to create a beast that you're you're constantly feeding. So, how do you continually adapt? How do you continually motivate yourself and inspire yourself to be excited to come into work every day? It can be very unforgiving and long hours and late nights and a lot of time away from the spotlight and everybody kind of waiting for you to screw up. And most of it's out of your control, so it's, they're fascinating characters.
I know. Well, look at Bill Belichick, walking example of that right there.
Yeah. You'd think he'd have a little sunnier disposition getting to coach Tom Brady for 20 years, but
but after the way you explain,
sure win a lot of games.
Yeah,
they sure win a lot of games.
Everyone's looking for him to fail.
Yeah, when I think of Bill Belichick, the thing that always strikes me is that he's always thinking about the next move. He's never relaxing. He's just he's never satisfied. And
that's how they're wired. That's what I mean. Like they can't, whether it's moment to moment in a game or game to game or season to season, like they can't really enjoy their success because they interpret enjoyment as relaxing and getting complacent. And then once you do that, you've lost your competitive edge, and then the whole world's going to just overtake you, and life is going to end as you know it. So that's how these guys are wired.
Well, that's a perfect segue right there. And I know we're getting near the end of our time here, but we'd be remiss if we didn't ask you about your experience, your tenure at Sports Illustrated between 1995 and 2017, 22 years. You saw everything. You came in at the top of the industry itself. Could you see for years the waterfall coming that the ship was about to go over?
Yeah, it's interesting to put it that way because, when I got there, all I ever wanted to do was write for Sports Illustrated. I just didn't think there was anything that could be better than that. And so the fact that I've been able to live out my dream continually astounds me. But I certainly got a very, close view to how that all fell apart. And there's really no mystery to it. Some companies are Blockbuster and some companies are Netflix, and it comes down to leadership. I think a lot of it had to do with the mergers, first time Warner merging with Turner. And then they were purchased by AOL with AOL stock.
Oh, geez.
And I think that transaction pretty much single-handedly burst the internet bubble. Who has AOL? Who even knows what AOL is anymore, But at the time, Tom Warner Turner was the biggest media conglomerate in the world, and AOL was able to buy it with their stock. And so you just kind of create this huge, there was the whole, mergers and acquisitions wave all through Wall Street and media and business and finance and everything, just exactly what we were saying with the NCAA. You become a big ocean liner that can't turn. And then that's compounded by, the people who are making decisions on what's in their best interests and what's in the company's best interests can diverge. Well, what are they going to favor in that respect? Their own stock portfolios or the future of the company? And so they just didn't adapt. Sports Illustrated in the early 80s had a chance to buy ESPN. ESPN, was just a struggling company owned by Getty Oil, and it was like, well, who knew that cable TV was going to be a thing, And then I was there when the internet started off, and they just always looked down their nose at it. As a young writer, I liked the internet and the website because it was an opportunity for me to write, and I was one of the early ones to really move over to the website as opposed to the magazine. So it was really just one after the other of just bad decisions and not adapting, not having any foresight, and everybody kind of protecting their own. So fast forward to what I'm doing now, working with this company called The Athletic, which is 100% paywall subscribers. There's not a single advertisement on any of the articles. And I think we publish, I don't know if it's a couple thousand a week now across all of our platforms of The Athletic. I'm the managing editor of the college basketball platform. I signed on to The Athletic 2.5 years ago. The company was barely a year old. They just raised a little bit of money. And I was their first national hire. And, I think at the time, they had maybe 20,000 paid subscribers across the company, and their latest public proclamation as of a couple months ago was 600,000 subscribers, and 400 staffers. And it's just amazing And again, I've got it's got nothing to do with me. Believe me, I'm writing my little college basketball articles and doing what I can. But our founders, Alex Mather and Adam Hansman, have built an unbelievable model straight out of Silicon Valley. So the pivot from Midtown Manhattan to Silicon Valley is a big reason why a company like The Athletic and the Netflixes of the world are really thriving, and the Sports Illustrateds of the world and the old media companies are really sinking because they're just not adapting fast enough.
No, and I don't want to single out Sports Illustrated, because this is something that's across the entire industry. Lots of smart people got caught up with this and weren't able to adapt, and that's just that's how business goes. Yeah. But The Athletic, this is exciting.
Yep.
So that's at theathletic.com, or how do we find that?
Yeah, it's theathletic.com. You got to sign up, but it's only like $4 or $5 a month. 1.5 cups of coffee.
Yeah.
And if you're any kind of sports fan, any kind of reader, trust me, it's worth it. It's just really, The Athletic has showed that if you give people something of quality, they will pay for it. It's a good business model in the world of journalism. So,
well, if they get to read tight journalism like yours,
hopefully that gives us all some hope.
Exactly.
I'll have to check it out. I spent a lot of time reading ESPN, going online and looking at that. I wonder if this is a better, this would be a step up, it sounds like.
Over ESPN? Absolutely.
Well, give it a shot. They have like a lot of the subscriptions. They have like free trials. You can get like 7 days for free.
Oh, okay.
And then decide if you want to buy. If you sign up and you do the trial, you're going to want to pony up. It's that good.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like a deal.
Stay connected with you, Seth. And
exactly.
There you go.
I want to thank you for your time. Who knows? I may see you when I'm in Manhattan Beach walking my dog around the block, and I know you live somewhere around there.
That'd be great. I'll probably be in my office typing and watching basketball.
My wife's a big fan.
Life.
She has a lot of respect for you. She's a big KU fan, and so
I appreciate that. Allen Fieldhouse. I took my son. Last year I did a CBS game in Allen Fieldhouse. It got assigned to me kind of late, and I said to him, my son wants to do what I do because I work for a living, and he's a big college basketball fan. So I said to my wife, I said, I got to take Zachary to Allen Fieldhouse and let him see that place. We went to visit James Naismith's grave, and it's a great place. But they got issues, but it's a great place.
All right, Eric. Well, unless you have anything further to say to Seth, I think we're gonna sign off and look forward to listening to this tonight. And thank you so much for your time, Seth. And I hope we stay in touch.
Yeah, it's great talking to you guys. I appreciate you having me on. Thank you very much.
A pleasure's ours, Seth. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody out there, the Chab Dog Sports Talk Radio Show Network, and our wonderful listeners.
Yes.
We're going to be on tomorrow morning.
We'll be on tomorrow for our regular show. Got a lot to talk about, including all the craziness in today's college football action and NFL.
Oh, the NFL matchups are fantastic tomorrow. Can't wait.
Okay. Well, thank you, Eric, for everything, and thank you, Seth Davis. And it was a great show, great interview, and
we'll talk to you tomorrow.
Have a great day for the rest of the day. I'll talk to you later. Bye.